Hello and welcome to ethBeats, Lessons in Graceful Living. I am Belinda. Today's topic is on governance. Governance refers to the overarching concept of controls and standards to govern relationships in a system. In the business world, we hear about corporate governance, which refers to the principles, practices, rules, and processes by which a corporate entity is run, whether it is a company, a partnership, a non-profit organization, or a government body. When we say that a corporate entity has good corporate governance, generally we mean that the organization has a culture of accountability and transparency, where the board and management give credence to the rights of different stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? These are usually the shareholders, the employees, the customers and suppliers of the company, and the community in which the company has its presence. A good organization looks after and balances the interests of these different stakeholders. Today, our guest is no stranger to managing complex issues and to holding himself to the highest standards of governance. We are very honored to welcome Mr. Patrick Tay to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Brother Patrick, as I call him, is a lawyer by training and has spent the better part of the last 3 decades volunteering at grassroots level in his community and championing workers' rights. Brother Patrick is currently the Assistant Secretary General in Singapore's National Trades Union Congress, an organization uniting many trade unions and associations, social enterprises, and other partners in creating better lives for workers in Singapore. He is also a member of Parliament and brings his experience and passion for improving the lives of his constituents. Brother Patrick, why is governance important in what you do? Could you share some experiences that have left an inedible impact in how you view and practice good governance?
I think governance is particularly important now that we are really talking about the ESG agenda, environment, social, and governance. I think governance has been put to the forefront in the left, right, center in many organizations, and even not just organizations, but in communities, industries, and in all parts of the world in the globe. And therefore, before I touch a bit on what governance means to me from where I am, from the National Trades Union Congress, I thought good to share a bit about what NTUC or the National Trades Union Congress does for the benefit of our listeners and those of you watching this. National Trades Union Congress is actually a federation of trade unions in Singapore, and within the National Trade Unions Congress, we have almost 60 affiliates. We call it affiliates, as you rightly point out. They are affiliated unions and associations to us, slightly more than 60. And we have today, I'm proud to say that we have something like slightly more than 1.1 million union members across all these more than 60 affiliated unions and associations. And I can sort of categorize them into 3 different sectors: the industrial, the services, as well as the public sector. So industrial meaning in industries such as in the electronics, metal, chemical industries, for example. Services sector will include hospitality, aviation, health services, and even security services. And of course, in the public sector, a big part of Singapore, we have public institutions, government and statutory boards who are also have their own unions to look after workers in the public sector. So in a way, we divide the more than 60 affiliates as well as 1.1 million members into these 3 big segments.
Wow.
However, besides the unions, we have gone through a lot of reorganization and refreshing. And in the last decade, we've been busy into different other spaces. For example, beyond the traditional unions, we have gone into working with freelancers, the freelance and self-employed. We've gone into the professionals, manager, executive space through having alliances with many of our youth associate partners. We have also looked after our migrant workers through our Migrant Worker Center and the Center for Domestic Employees. And finally, we also recognize that in Singapore, a large number of companies, we have more than 200,000 companies in Singapore, and a large part of them are small and medium enterprises. So we have gone to that space as well to, work closely with them to provide a leg up in a way to support them to better the lives and livelihoods of our workers in those small and medium enterprises. So that's in a nutshell what NTUC and the labour movement does. And so as you can see, we are quite a large entity, and as being a federation of trade unions and associations, we actually have a lot of interface and work very, very closely with many of our affiliates. I call it affiliates. Why? Because each of our more than 60 unions and associations have their own constitution, governed by their own executive council, boards, and committees. So very much governance in that sense are pretty much on their own, accountable to their members as well as to their executive council, to their union leaders on the ground and in their respective unions. So I think governance plays a very, very important part.
Right.
And in particular, governance from a labour movement point of view and from a trade union point of view, I would say I can dichotomize into two big relationships. The very first relationship is the relationship between the employer and the union. This is increasingly important, as we have seen during the recent pandemic, where we had to have a lot of interface with companies to make sure that they stay afloat. The other big relationship is with our members, the union and the members. So I would say I would want to share a bit more about what governance means to me and, of course, our trade unions in these two aspects.
Okay. Yeah. Good idea. The across the board, how the employees look at governance. How can I apply governance to the sector?
Yeah. In particular, governance from an employer and trade union perspective, as you know, in Singapore, we have quite a number of laws. Not just laws related to the manpower and labour space, but also regulations, and we have lots of tripartite guidelines and tripartite standards, including tripartite advisories. This is not new. I mean, the very, very first form of a tripartite guideline was started in 1972, the National Wages Council Guidelines, and it's been an annual affair where we roll out wage guidelines on to the whole of the Singapore workforce and populace. So that was the first semblance of a tripartite guidelines, and through the years we have done quite a number. And of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, tripartite partners played a very pivotal role in working together to respond quite quickly and quite promptly to some of the challenges. So therefore, the compliance with these guidelines, advisories, as well as laws and regulations is of particular importance in dealing with companies and unions interface with them. Yeah.
So you mentioned you have so many industries, right? And all these employees or union members, they have different background. So how can they think that, I'm doing governance, I am practicing governance? How would the person feel? Or how are you going to instill governance into this across the board? Because there's so different background.
Yes, you're right.
The aviation industry, the hospitality industry, one's flying high, one is on the ground.
So as I mentioned about tripartite, I think we have gone from a very national tripartite framework between the government, NTUC, as well as our employer partners, which is the Singapore National Employers Federation. And that has kind of evolved into sectoral and cluster-wide tripartism. For example, in the financial sector, we work very closely with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, including the Institute of Banking and Finance, and of course with the head honchos of the three different segments in the financial sector: the bank space, Association of Banks Singapore, as well as the insurance, the two big insurance associations, as well as the asset management association. So I think this example of how at a sectoral level we try to roll out points in this space in terms of governance, in terms of compliance with guidelines, laws, rules, and many of the programs at the sectoral level. And hopefully you will cascade down and percolate down much better than at the national level.
Okay, great. What would be a few takeaway lessons from these stories that you have shared from these,
I think it's very important, particularly as we grapple with the uncertainties, the headwinds, and the many different challenges. Yeah, in Singapore, we have quite a number of challenges, both from an ESG point of view as well as from a governance point of view. Why do I say that? You have a changing future of work. Yeah, the workplaces are changing. We have hybrid work arrangements. The workforce is rapidly changing as well. More white-collar workers, and of course, we have an aging workforce and a shrinking workforce as well, because we have an aging workforce and we have a low fertility rate in Singapore. So I think that's another big challenge. And the nature of work. I think with the half-life of skills shortening and a lot of transformation and reorganization and restructuring going around in various organizations, including SMEs that have to transform and to keep pace with the changes, and with digitalization, and with all the different exacting challenges, I think there's the need to really stay ahead of the curve. And therefore, a few important things I thought would be a key takeaway or call out to everyone who's listening into this, whether you're an employer, whether you're an employee, whether you're someone who's in the governance space, is what I call the 3 R's.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yes.
Ready, relevant, and resilient. Yeah, particularly important. And resilient,
Resilience,
yeah.
yes.
Firstly, ready with the knowledge and the skills. I think there are a lot of new guidelines, policies, and things for you to comply with. And therefore, very, very important to be able to be readily equipped with the skills and knowledge so that you can cascade down and at the organizational level, at the departmental level, as well as at the personal level, particularly if you are involved in such interface with the unions and labor movement. And secondly, of course, relevant. Yeah, relevant because jobs are being morphed, transformed. I think particularly governance is a space where you really with all the changing rules and changing platforms and the changing future of work, very, very important to stay relevant. Yeah, in that governance framework as well as the governance role if you're in the governance role. And finally, resilient. I keep mentioning resilient because I think it's important. Particularly, as I mentioned, the headwinds and a lot of the curveballs, important for us to stay resilient so that we are able to be more adaptable and be able to bounce back if we face any curveballs.
As the last question for you, you mentioned about stewardship. Stewardship, there is accountability and trust. How do you put all this into, what you just earlier described?
Thanks, Belinda, for that question, because earlier on we talked about compliance, particularly between the relationship between the employers and the unions, and compliance with laws, regulations, guidelines, advisories, including collective agreements. Yeah, we've actually gone to court a few times because some employers don't actually comply with some of the provisions in the collective agreement. So that's an example of one aspect of it, the employer and union relationship. When you talk about stewardship, I think it's the other relationship which where stewardship is particularly important, that relationship between the union and its members. Of course, there's a constitution of every union, and many of our unions have been around for long decades, and stewardship is particularly important. What aspect of stewardship? I think, of course, members pay union dues. It's $9 a month today, and through the years, I think unions have collected dues from union members, and therefore governance is particularly important, both from an NTUC perspective as well as from a union perspective. We want to ensure that our unions, our union leaders, and people who run the unions, are good stewards of the funds. So don't go into risky investments. So there are actually rules and guidelines to support them in terms of financial policies, how to better manage. And therefore, I must say, I'm proud to say, of course, with a lot of support also from the Registry of Trade Unions, that our unions are besides providing annual financial statements to the Registry of Trade Unions, sort of to be transparent. Every 4 years, in fact, where we have a delegates conference, where the entire union and its members and its delegates come together, there's a financial report. So everything is very transparent. And therefore, transparency is one key aspect of governance and as good stewardship on the part of the unions. And the other part is also, like you rightly pointed to, it's not just transparency, but accountability. So every expenditure, particularly major expenditures, for example, if they decide to buy a property or do a major purchase or spend certain monies for the benefit of members, or even roll out schemes and programs to provide welfare to members. So that part of it, if the expenditure goes above certain limits, there are financial limits, and it's provided in the Constitution, and therefore delegates may have to vote at a general meeting to endorse and approve those expenditures. So that's another aspect of it. So besides transparency, then there's accountability as well, and of course, finally, trust. Very, very important. I think every 4 years, we elect most unions every 4 years will elect their executive council or executive committee, and therefore our members put the trust in these union leaders and these delegates to run the union and make decisions on behalf of the entire union and its members. So very, very important that we need to have strong trust between the union and the leaders and with our members. So I think this covers some of the key aspects of being a good steward, developing, strengthening the trust, being accountable to our members, at the same time, also being transparent in all our interactions.
Thank you, Brother Patrick, for being our guest on our podcast and for sharing your experiences with us. Dear listeners, we hope today's episode has been interesting to you. ethBeats is the podcast of the FB platform, supported by RHT Grace Institute, a non-profit organization. You may find more information in the notes to this podcast. Until next time, stay positive and stay safe.